Hello. 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 This is the My Artifact episode number 4119. Today's date is June 24, 2026. It's been almost like a morning at 7:27 a.m. Alright, the monsoon is officially started. The last night rain was like a really good. Like I'm gonna tell you, okay, how it kind of like a look. So basically, there are a lot of trees over there. Have you ever seen? There's a trees. Yes, there is a trees. So this is my kind of like a somewhat something surround. Okay, and because of this surround, it just kind of like a thing like that. Ki, like a lot of feel really good. Yeah. Okay. So should we jump to the question? All right, let's go. All right. So question is how I will follow the Indian traceability laws. Okay, that's a really good question. Okay, it's a legal question by the way. All right. First of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? Couple of days ago, I might gonna be sit over here. This would be kind of like a much more better. Okay. Okay. So what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? Yeah, I wanted to build an app called My Artifact. What exactly is this application? When you write the diary, you cannot able to be write the diary the way that you wanted to. The reason is that your writing speed is much more slower than your thought process. Why does writing speed is slower? Because when you need to write something, you need to put a lot of effort to print your thoughts. I'm saying print your thoughts. You need a pen, you need a paper, you need a convenience, and even after that, you might not kind of like a print your thoughts. You might not kind of like a simply like a write your thoughts because it's not really possible because your thought speed is kind of like a much more faster. So, what if instead of writing a diary, what if we could record a diary, like a audio recorded diary? Okay. Um, the audio recorded diary, it's a like a basically the stuff that you are kind of like a listening or seeing right now. This is my audio diary. Okay. I called it Artifact, my Artifact. This is kind of like a you are listening. This is my Artifact episode number 4119. I am doing this thing for past 11 years. I am doing this thing every single time because of writing a diary is a self-reflection process, same as recording a diary or recording an artifact is a self-reflection process. Because of this thing, it add so much amount of value in myself. The person that I became today, the person that I will become tomorrow, it is all because of this artifact. The amount of value that artifact add in me, I wanted to share this value to the people so that people should supposed to be experience that thing, not just kind of like the internal thing, the value. Okay, how do I supposed to share this thing? By building an application. My application is a somewhat something like a YouTube platform. In a YouTube, you kind of like a somebody upload your video, other people kind of like a sees the video. Same thing, you kind of like a somebody upload your artifact, record your artifact, upload your artifact, other people kind of like a listen your artifact. By the way, artifact is a audio based platform. There is only one catch, is that no one will gonna know your real name. Your real name is always been hidden. Like basically my real name is Saurabh Avthare, but my artifact handle name would be Prozac 1943 or something else. So that kind of like a people will not gonna know me and things like that, and that privacy is very much essential. So this is my application. Before I wanted to build this application, I wanted to aware of all the possible consequences, specifically worst possible consequences. Okay. So I went to ChatGPT. I said that he suggests me this is my app. Okay, I tell my application ID and things and that and that. I said that he suggests me hundreds of worst possible consequences in question. ChatGPT kind of like suggests me those hundreds of question. This is one of those question. By the way, question actually in the mobile phone, but while recording, I cannot do anything at all. So that's why I wrote the question in here. And this is the question. By the way, this is a book that I'm reading right now, The Principia of Mathematica by Isaac Newton. Highly recommend to you to read this book. Okay. Now, the question is that how do I follow the Indian traceability laws and things and that and that. Okay, so what is exactly the traceability law and what is exactly that? I am belong to the India. Okay, so I am kind of like a try to tell you from Indian context point of perspective, as well as kind of like a rest of the world point of perspective too. Okay, so in India, if you are kind of like a building a social media platform, okay, or if you are kind of like a simply building a e-commerce platform, or like whatever the kind of like a platform that you build, if you have 5 million user, okay, then you need to kind of like a show the traceability. What's kind of like a traceability? Okay, imagine a particular person who kind of like a recorded artifact regarding about something that it's not really good. Okay, like basically he kind of like a recorded artifact regarding about the religious or hate speeches or whatnot. Okay, he kind of talk about something that is not really good. Okay, and kind of like a simply maybe somehow that artifact went viral, and because of that artifact went viral, then there is a problem will gonna happen to the Indian government. Why? Because of that this artifact is viral in Indian demographic region, and that particular person kind of like said something which is completely wrong regarding about the religious hate speeches and things and that it kind of like create a chaos in the society because of his artifact. And because of his artifact went viral and chaos will start in the society. Then Indian government are try to know who is that particular person. Because of that, I am kind of like providing a kind of like a simply such a kind of like a simply interface where user identity no one will gonna know. Okay, so in that situation, if the Indian government want me, they come to me and they say this thing that this particular person kind of like simply said so many stuff, and we wanted to take the action regarding about that particular person. So give me his name and things and that so that we would kind of like take the legal action towards that particular person. But how do I supposed to give the information? Because I don't know the information. Why? Because I don't really have the information. I like basically is this thing that I might have their email ID, but like basically email IDs also I'm not really collecting. Like basically what kind of like a data I'm collecting their location, their time, and their artifact. Then after that I'm not collecting anything. Right now usually kind of like people went to my application to log in. Okay, so basically I'm not try to collect their email ID, but probably this thing I have to be kind of like create a middle ground so that I would not gonna know the user email ID, but I will try to authenticate. Because if the people will try to utilize my application for wrong purposes, then a middleman would kind of like simply give me that specific email ID that I wanted to. That middleman or that authenticator or things, I don't know. I am a kind of like architecture would be kind of like much more better. That architecture will kind of like prevent me to not to get the email ID. But whenever I need the email ID from the particular person who kind of like started chaos and things and that I went to that architecture, kind of like I said I need this particular person email ID. Architecture kind of like give me, and kind of like I will kind of like provide that information to the Indian government that this is a particular person, his email ID is this thing, and take the action and things and that. Okay, but let me tell you one thing, I don't want to do anything at all. Why? Like this is completely wrong, na? Like you have to kind of like give the information to the government, because it's really essential. Because if the particular person kind of like utilize your platform for wrong purposes, then obviously it's wrong, definitely wrong. Okay, yeah. So if you are kind of like somebody that keep like not giving the information to the government and this, so why are you kind of like saying this thing that key you will like you will not gonna like okay, yeah. Like basically is this thing na ki I believe in solve the problem before it's even existed. This is a kind of like a motto. Like I believe that ki like basically is this thing that ki why this actually happened at first place. Because I don't want to kind of like somebody jump into the kind of like somebody the legal binding and things like that. Because let me tell you one thing, artifact is a kind of like a preventing the authenticity of the user. Their real name and things will not gonna know no one. Even I will not gonna know nothing really at all. Okay. So basically in that situation, okay, every countries have different laws. Like I'm belong to the India, so I knew the kind of like a laws regarding about that ki 5 million user kind of like if you are kind of like across that threshold, like a more than 5 million user, then you have to kind of like share the information to the kind of like a government and things and that. Okay. But kind of like every countries have different laws. US has a different laws, Europe has a different laws, Southeast Asian country have different laws, South America have different laws regarding about the kind of like somebody how the kind of like somebody social media network will gonna happen and things and that. African have kind of like a different laws and things and that. There are almost like a 193 country, and each country have a kind of like some different laws regarding about the kind of like some social media regulation and things and that. Because my application is a kind of like a somewhat something in between the category of the social media platform. So in that situation, it's not really possible for me for that key kind of like a give the traceability for every country and things and that. It's possible, yeah. It's not really that it's not really possible. It is possible, but still is this thing I believe that key it's a kind of like a somebody fixing the mistake after the mistake. So I am not believing that. If I know that ki this might gonna problem will gonna happen in the future, I make sure that that problem will not gonna happen, because I believe that ki solving the problem before it even exists, that would be kind of like a much more better. And how do I supposed to do that thing? How is a kind of like a thing actually happen? First of all is that let me clarify. If government asking me to kind of like give the particular person information regarding about that particular person create a chaos in the society or community or in a kind of like a demographic area or things and that, if the government asks me that information, I will kind of like give that information. That is really essential. Okay, it's my legal binding. It's a kind of like a thing that it's a kind of like a thing that key I have to be do this thing. Okay, yeah, I am kind of like a legally bounded with that country, because I am kind of like a doing business on that country. So yeah, I have to be do this thing. Okay. Sure. Okay, now I'm trying to talk about first of all how that particular law execute and things and that. I'm specifically talking about the Indian context point of perspective. I'm not really sure about the other countries point of perspective. Okay, so in Indian context point of perspective, for this particular law, if you're kind of like a user base actually more than 5 million, then kind of like you need a kind of like somebody create a system regarding about this particular law. What is exactly the system? A system means like that ki like basically is this thing that ki you need 3 people from the company. Okay, like basically I run the company, my artifact, so I need a kind of like 3 people who are kind of like live in India and who are the responsible for kind of like whatever this matter will gonna happen. Those 3 people are responsible, like they are kind of like represent my side, like from company side. These people are the resident of India. These people are kind of like a stay in India. Okay, yeah. Whenever that situation or chaos will gonna happen, government will kind of like talk to them. Okay, and kind of like things. Usually these 3 people are lawyers or kind of like things and that. Okay, these are kind of like 3 people, and those 3 people will kind of like how like kind of like they will came to me, say this thing, this is the kind of like a user creating chaos and things, government wants information, give that information or not, or things and that. Okay, so these are kind of like a three people are kind of like a responsible for everything chaos will gonna happen. Then those three people will kind of like a simply figure it out. Why I am not responsible? I am the responsible, by the way, but still is this thing that now I am the chairman of the company. Obviously I would not be kind of like a somebody in the country all the time. Have you ever kind of like realized that birds are kind of like creating that much creepy sound? Like basically their volume is that much, but they are kind of like emitting so much amount of sound that just like whatever. Okay, where I was, I was kind of like a three people, yeah. So those three people are should supposed to be kind of like somebody stay in the India. They are the resident of the India, and they are the citizen of the India, and they should supposed to be kind of like a tell my side and things and that. Okay, they will kind of like represent a company's side, and these are three people, usually the lawyers and things and that. Okay, and they are kind of like a try to kind of like handle the entire kind of like consequences and scenario and things and that. Why not government directly came to me? Because I am the chairman, and I do have a lot of responsibility. Beside that, ki kind of like a focus on this chaos. I am a chairman. I have kind of like a lot of things. I might not be in the country for all the time and things and that. So in that situation, I need to hire those three people, and those three people have kind of like some responsibility to kind of like maintain that kind of like a chaos. Each country has a kind of like a different thing. In India, we have kind of like a three people. In US, required a kind of like a somebody the authorization and kind of like a federal laws and things and that. There is a lot of thing actually happen, because US laws is kind of like a bit more strict regarding about the social media regulation, regarding about everything. In India, it is like we have a kind of like a regulation, but kind of like a US has a kind of like a little bit of strict regulation regarding about that what kind of information kind of like a things and that. So every country has its kind of like own regulation and things and that. Okay, so those are kind of like three people are kind of like responsible to kind of like handle that situation. Okay, so this is a kind of like a structure of the law. Okay, if that three people required a kind of like some places thing that key, if the chaos will gonna happen, so how this process actually happened. Okay, the stuff that I mentioned is this thing. Those three people are kind of like somebody responsible for those are kind of like somebody this is a legal matter. Okay, it's a legal matter. So in that legal matter, kind of like somebody, it's not really that key. If the government ask me that ki I need this user information, give me that particular user information. Okay, yeah. It's not really that ki I have to kind of like give the user information to the Indian government or to the any government. Why? Okay, why? Because of that na ki it's a kind of like some psychology. You have to understand this thing. Okay, when you kind of like create a product, millions of people are kind of like utilizing your product, then probably people are kind of like utilizing for like a right purposes and wrong purposes too. Okay, yeah. And sometimes, or maybe kind of like somebody, most of the time, okay, yeah, kind of like somebody is this thing that na ki Indian government, or not just the Indian government, any government are try to regulate the application, try to regulate the kind of like things. Okay, what is exactly that? What exactly is this thing? Okay, Facebook is a kind of like a really good example. Now Facebook is a kind of like a some this thing that key is a kind of like a website. Okay, or kind of like application where people kind of like connect each other and things and that. Okay, obviously in the Facebook there is a lot of thing people are kind of like utilizing their platform for wrong of purposes and things and that. So basically what exactly happened that ki Facebook has to be kind of like, Facebook is a kind of like a somebody US company, it's not Indian company. Okay, but because of they are kind of like a somebody providing services in India, so it is really essential for Facebook to kind of like create a branch in India that kind of like responsible for Indian demographic, and as well as whatever the kind of like a chaos and things happen. So basically we actually kind of like see in Facebook.India. So basically it's this thing, Facebook.in, it's a kind of like a sub branch of Facebook, which is kind of like responsible for whatever the chaos will gonna happen, make sure that this thing will gonna happen. So basically, is this thing, the Indian government will not kind of like a went to the Mark Zuckerberg, will not kind of like a went to the kind of like a Facebook, the Facebook.com. No, they will kind of like a came to the Indian demographic Facebook.in, and they will try to kind of like a contact and try to figure it out the solution and things like that and that. Okay, so this actually happens. So company has to be kind of like a create a kind of like a subdivision in every country, not every country, like regarding about the kind of like a user size and things like that and that, because India is a kind of like a higher population density country, and because of in India have a kind of like a more than 10 20 more than kind of like a millions of people are kind of like a utilizing his platform. So so Facebook has a Facebook, not it's a Meta has a kind of like a responsibility to kind of like a create a separate division for India to kind of like a handle all the situation regarding about all the social media platform chaos and kind of like Indian regulations, IT Act and things and that and that. So there is a lot of things. Okay, so Facebook, the US company will not gonna handle this thing. They kind of like a create a separate kind of like a meta dot in, means kind of like a whatever the consequences will gonna happen, they kind of like a manage that thing. Okay, so you kind of like a simply see this thing like a Apple India or kind of like a Netflix.in or kind of like a thing like these are kind of like a subdivision of that main company. Okay, and which is kind of like a very much essential for the company that you have to kind of like a create the separate branch that could kind of like a handle that demographic things and that and that. Okay, all the kind of like a legal regulation things. So in my situation, basically Artifact is a kind of like Indian startup. So basically it's this thing that it's not that I need a kind of like a create a kind of like artifact.in. No, it's not. Okay, because it's an Indian startup. Okay, yeah, like it's a kind of like a things. But if I went to US, then probably is this thing that I need a kind of like a create a separate department regarding about the handling all the situation over there. My artifact.us or whatever the kind of like a domain name that they have to kind of like handle all the kind of like a US thing and that and that. Am I be responsible for that? I'm not responsible, but kind of like the person who kind of like a kind of like a head in that thing, head in that kind of like a artifact.us head, who is responsible for that. But still somewhat something I also responsible for that, because when the update or any kind of like a feature will roll out, it's not gonna roll out in kind of like a one specific demographic thing, it roll out in all around the world. Okay, yeah. So in that situation, it's really kind of like a really essential to kind of like a things that like I also responsible for this thing, but legally not. Okay, legally not. Okay, so this is a kind of like a structure regarding about that. Like I think that I know, but I'm not really sure about this thing, because every country has a kind of like different laws. In India have a kind of like a like basically this is the kind of like a laws that I know, like I kind of like a search on Google and things like that. But still there is a lot of deeper layer regarding about that, how things will gonna happen, how the structure actually happen, how the kind of like a handle the situation and things and that this will gonna happen, who is actually responsible for that, kind of like who is kind of like a legal binding, if there is a kind of like a government kind of like somebody do the fine, then probably how this actually happened, how do we kind of like somebody like if the legal battle actually happened in the court, so how is things actually happened, who will kind of like fund the money, who will kind of like give the money, who will kind of like give the fine and things and that. There is a like a lot of kind of like a back end structure actually happened on this regulation and things and that, and then every country have that kind of like a regulation. Okay, so I like right now I don't know about this kind of like a regulation. I just kind of like knew this thing that if something happened, then I have to kind of like give them information, but also make sure that user like a government will not kind of like try to intervene more. Okay, because if the government are try to intervene more, if they are kind of like asking me, I need this user information, I need this user information, I need this user information, in that situation, like what exactly happen if such thing will gonna happen? It kind of like basically what is actually happened, that it is really essential to kind of like somebody like what is actually the word for say the trust of the platform. Okay, like if you gonna say is this thing that something chaos happened is because of Facebook, or something chaos happened because of the Instagram and things like that and that. So in that particular demographic area, people try to not to use your application. Okay, because of that chaos happened and things and that. Okay, and it really impact a kind of like somebody chairman of the company, specifically me. Okay, because if something actually happened that key because of the artifact, kind of like this particular person die and things and that and that and that, or chaos happen, whatever it is. Okay, there are multiple situations. So people lose the trust, people lose the faith, people lose the kind of like this platform is not really good. Then usually people kind of like somebody at the spur of the moment, or at the heat of the moment, or at the kind of like whatever the kind of like things that they have, they just kind of like somebody not to use the application, not to kind of like and this kind of like create a kind of like somebody lot of problem for the company point of perspective. Okay, because kind of like facing lot of kind of like losses and things and that, even if your platform is kind of like a much more better and it kind of like impact only but only 0.00001 particular person, but still it kind of like create distrust. And because of distrust, loss of follower, loss of people, loss of trust, loss of kind of like assembly, the like basically the market went down, the share market went crash and things and that. So this is all actually happened, okay, by this kind of like a things. So like a legal binding is a kind of like a very kind of like a things like a I kind of like a knew a kind of like a one particular scenario regarding about the kind of like a somebody the Twitter. Okay, yeah. Formally right now it has a X name, but previously it called as a Twitter. And basically what is actually happened that na ki some people are kind of like a somebody putting the Twitter bots and things and that they are not kind of like a legit user, but they kind of like a somebody is this thing that ki they manipulate the election. Okay, what do you mean by manipulate the election? Like basically the user in the Twitter platform are not real user, they are bots, and they are kind of like a sharing such a post regarding about kind of like a something that ki election things that ki like in India BJP and Congress have kind of like a two main parties. So kind of like these bots, like I'm not saying one or two bots, thousands of bots are kind of like sharing photos regarding about the BJP, regarding about the one specific things, and kind of like a downsizing the another kind of like some political party and things and that is called defaming. That is called kind of like a defamation in internet. So this is all actually happening, and because of this actually happened, the Indian kind of like some Indian government intervene and kind of like went to the chairman of the Twitter. At that time Elon Musk was not the chairman, at that time there is someone else chairman, and that particular person kind of like a block kind of like a millions of kind of like a Twitter handle, not millions but thousands of Twitter handle, block it or kind of like a lock that things, and what not happened, then chaos actually happened, the Twitter prices kind of like a crash, and lot of things actually happened. Okay, yeah. Like yeah, this is kind of like somewhat something actually happened, and kind of like somebody the because India is a kind of like a very big demographic area where like millions of people are kind of like utilizing the Twitter platform. So it affect on their growth, it affect on their profit, it affect on their share market things, and literally everything went crash. Okay, so do you understand? This is all actually happening. This is all kind of like a shit actually happened. So do you understand? This is kind of like when that chaos happened exponentially, like literally just like it just happened already, it just wow. And then yeah, so in that situation, that structure is a kind of like somebody, that structure is a kind of like a prevent that thing to kind of like make sure that na ki company kind of like a telling their point of perspective, what is actually their platform and what is actually they are kind of like offering to the people, to the community and things and that, as well as government kind of like somebody also make sure that na ki this platform is kind of like not ruin the community purposes, their things and that. So it's yeah, there's a kind of like a back and forth things actually happen. Like basically the particular person who started the chaos, okay, that particular person does not really affect that much. Maybe that a particular person might gonna get affected, but usually the most of the chaos actually happened to the company point of perspective. Company lost the trust, company loses kind of like a lot of kind of like a share value, share market and things and that, and there's a things and a lot of back and forth, and then there is a fine actually happen. And like if the government kind of like put the fine in some sort of social media platform, then it's not just a kind of like a fine, it's a very long fine, like basically hundreds of millions of dollar or $10 million, like these are the fines. Okay, yeah. And kind of like somebody kind of like a social media kind of like a company try to kind of like do the legal battle, that why are you kind of like asking this fine and things and that. By the way, the social media company or every company who are kind of like running the services on the air on every country, they have kind of like a paid a tax to that particular economy. I have to pay the tax. But even after I paid the tax, then after that kind of like some these legal battle happened, and if the kind of like a fine is actually government kind of like tells that you have to give this fine, then I have to be pay the fine, or I have to fight with the legal battle in their court. Okay, in their court. Okay. Okay, it's not really that key. I have to kind of like a fight in my court. Like basically, is this thing that key, I am an Indian company. So basically, if I have a kind of like assembly that key legal battle between the kind of like a, let's just say a kind of like assembly Germany. So the fight will not gonna happen in Indian court. No, the fight will gonna happen in German court. Okay, yeah. Like this is kind of like a things. Okay, so basically the chances of winning for social media company is like nothing else. Okay, yeah, their government will try to blame, and yeah, like a lot of things will gonna happen. Okay, yeah. So, and basically it's this thing in my particular platform, this particular thing actually happened more. Like there is a higher possibility chances that this particular thing is actually happen more in my platform. So in that situation, what is actually my things? Okay, yeah. Okay, so basically it's this thing that he okay, basically it's this thing that he I make sure that when the user kind of like a record the artifact, I created a kind of like a judgmental system. What's the judgmental system? Every artifact is actually judged by the kind of like a Adam. Adam is the AI algorithm, and people. It's a kind of like a 30-70 ratio. Adam kind of like a judge first regarding about their context, whatever that particular person said and things and that and that. If whatever that particular person said, it does not violate the kind of like a community guidelines or things, then it kind of like a give the score. Okay, Adam kind of like a give the score if that artifact kind of like a violate the community guideline regarding about that. If you said something regarding about particular country, or kind of like a defame the particular person, or whatever actually happened, kind of like assembly Adam kind of like a give you the score. Okay, let's just say you kind of like a did a kind of like a wrong thing with your artifact, like a kind of like a said something. Adam kind of like a give the score kind of like a 10 out of 2 or 10 out of 1. Okay, then from that thing obviously you will kind of like a recommend to the less, and when it kind of like a recommend to the less, your artifact will not kind of like a went into the viral, and this chaos will not gonna happen. Okay, yeah, this chaos will not gonna happen. 70% is also artifact as we judged by the people, but if you kind of like a let them kind of like a give the rating already, then people also kind of like a look at the very differently. Like it's a kind of like a things, it's a considered as a box. Okay, good artifact, bad artifact. Okay, yeah, whatever the people will kind of like a talk, it's a kind of like a artifact will kind of like a judge by the on which box that they should supposed to be get, a bad box or good box. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing regarding about the particular person kind of like a said something really good, then that artifact went into the kind of like a good box. Okay, good box means higher rating, and because of the kind of like a backing of people thing, then it kind of like a recommend to the more if you are talking something really good in the artifact. Okay, like a self-help, like a knowledge or things and that it kind of like a recommend to the more. But if you are talking something bad, okay, yeah, like a defame or kind of like somebody the like hate speeches and things and that the Adam will kind of like judge the artifact, it kind of like put it into the bad artifact box. That bad artifact box have kind of like a less recommendation, so because of it less recommendation, it will not kind of like a recommend to the more. So this is what actually happened. The good artifact actually recommend more, bad artifact recommend less. So basically if whatever the kind of like a people said something will not gonna went viral, so this chaos will not gonna start. Okay, so this is kind of like the algorithm, but still it's not just as easy as I'm saying is this thing, because I have to be understand what is actually right and what is actually wrong. Okay, yeah, because I have to be define what's right and what's wrong. Example, a particular person kind of like a talk about something of one political company, one political kind of like a somebody party kind of like a doing a lot of corruption and things and that and that and that and that and that. Okay, yeah, is it wrong thing? Obviously it's a wrong thing. Okay, but what if that political party kind of like a doing all those things, it's not a kind of like a corruption, it's a kind of like a collecting money from the people to kind of like a providing better value and things and that. Now basically this information is not revealed at that time, so in that situation it's a kind of like a defamation, because the political party kind of like a try to do something right, but because of the kind of like a artifact kind of like a do the defamation and things and that. So in that situation, what is actually right, what is actually wrong, it's very hard to define, because from personal point of perspective it is kind of like a very easy to say okay, killing people wrong, not killing people is right. Okay, but when you try to went to the kind of like assembly the national or world level, then every particular point of perspective have a kind of like a different opinion. That different opinion kind of like a shapes what's right and what's wrong. Okay, and this is kind of like something I have to be defined. Okay, so that's a kind of like a biggest kind of like a things. Okay, I am trying to figure it out what's exactly right and what's really wrong. Then I don't know at the moment, but I will kind of like make sure. But this is kind of like only the legal regulation regarding about the specifically not only just in India but every country have a kind of like a different things. All right, I'm really tired right now. Thank you.